Hey, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I almost didn't publish today's interview. Kind of drug my feet for a while for no good reason. The best I can come up with is the core of today's conversation is a failure of the US military, and that it almost felt personal, like an attack on me. Of course, that's not what Harrison meant. Harrison Mann's today's guest. It's not the approach he took. You'll see he's certainly not taking that direction at all. But the military's been a big part of my life. Between 4 years at West Point and then 15 years between the Guard, Reserve, and active duty. It's almost 20 years of my time alive. About half of my life has been pretty heavily influenced by the military in a good way. I mean, some of the absolute best people I have ever met and still know today wear the uniform, full of integrity and selflessness and honor. They go out of their way to help people they've never met and will never meet in the future. Like just wonderful, incredible people. Some of the best Americans wear the uniform today. That said, we do still make mistakes. That's not new. That's not unique. And if I genuinely care about this institution, the U.S. military, that, again, I think is a force for good. I genuinely believe that, and I think it's a positive impact on the United States and the world. I think it's full of good people. And if I believe that, then I think it's important to tackle some of these subjects head on and not ignore them and hope they go away. So here is my conversation with Harrison Mann, a former U.S. Army major and executive officer of the Defense Intelligence Agency's Middle East Africa Regional Center, who resigned in protest at his office's support for Israel's war in Gaza. We talk about the Minab school strike in Iran, where the investigation stands right now, and the impact this has on the perception of the U.S. military at home and abroad. And with that, let's get to the conversation. Harrison, sir, thank you so much for taking the time to chat for a little bit today. There's a subject that we connected over through Murtaza Hussein, and I was hoping to dive into that today. The Minab school strike in Iran. That was front of news for a very short period of time. It seems like there's nothing on it anymore. I think there's an investigation happening, but maybe kind of to start this off, what happened and where does that sit today?
Yeah. And first of all, thanks for having me. And
Of
nice
course,
to
man.
meet you,
Yeah.
Preston. But yeah, in the I think opening moments of the war, basically, or the first days, when everything we know, by the way, is from press, right? So to the extent that we know, reportedly, American Tomahawk missile hit a school in southern Iran, in an area called Minab. We now know it was a succession of three Tomahawks on the same school, and it killed about 150 school children and other people. The reason that it looks like the school was hit is that it was formerly on an Iranian military base, and was still near an Iranian military base, but had not been actually on the base, which had moved to no longer include the school for about a decade. And so the situation on the ground was pretty immediately apparent after the strike. And of course, the administration denied it. Trump speculated that it could have been an Iranian missile, but open source analysis from a variety of outlets pretty immediately identified it as an American munition, aside from the fact that it didn't make sense for Iran to strike its own school. And we're now months later. There were promised investigations and reports from DoD, from CENTCOM. Those have never manifested. I think at the time, the CENTCOM commander, Admiral Cooper, said something to the effect of, "We're looking into it," but the administration, the Pentagon, or CENTCOM have not provided any more information about what happened, which would really be confirming what I think everybody knows, which is that the U.S. hit this school. Why did they hit this school? At the outset, there was a lot of speculation and reporting. Well, maybe it's because they were using AI systems that somehow identified it as a target. I would say, having worked in one of the multiple offices within the IC that's responsible for validating these kinds of targets, when I was at DIA in the Middle East Africa Regional Center, the MARC, was, whether or not AI was involved, what almost certainly happened was they were using old targeting data that had not been revalidated. And that, the more journalists have looked into it, the more that looks like that was the case. The way that this works is, let's say in a country like Iran, the cumulative US military and IC probably have thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more targets registered in a database. Takes a very long time to update and verify those targets. Even if you want to, it takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of manpower. The department I worked in DIA contained some of the analysts whose job it was to verify targets like that. And it's very tedious, kind of grinding, backbreaking work at the computer where you've got a list of like 100 targets that you got to look at, and consult different databases, consult different intelligence sources, and figure out if this armor base in eastern Iran is still there and is still what it's supposed to be. And so, pretty clearly, what happened is the Pentagon, was going for quantity over quality on targets. They started this war. I'd say it seems pretty clearly without giving the entire department or the commands that much time to prepare. If you had been preparing for this war for a year and you had wanted to prioritize avoiding civilian casualties, then you would have put a lot of resources into verifying your targets. That clearly didn't happen, and so whoever fired those missiles thought they were hitting a base, because nobody had looked at that target before the war began. There could have been human error there. As somebody who's been part of the teams that receive these requests, sometimes, hey, CENTCOM has a new target, we need to verify it. It's like I said, it's like a very rote task. Outside of a war, it's something that people might not necessarily put their most attention into, but it's pretty clear that there was no intention of revetting all of the targets that we're going to strike in this war. And so that's why this school was hit.
If we go back to the time of the strike, there was a lot of speculation. The fog of war was thick, and there were things blowing up all across Iran. And we have seen missiles that don't make it out of Iranian airspace. That was not a complete unknown. So there was a window there of, okay, let's wait, try to gather some information. Once there's more available, what, from your opinion, points now to it being the United States? Have there been reporters on the ground? Has Iran?
So there have been reporters on the ground. Okay. At least Sky News, which just did a big program about this, and others have gone to the ground. They've had munitions experts analyze aerial footage of the impact, to say, yeah, this is pretty consistent with the U.S. Tomahawk, and certainly would not be consistent with an Iranian missile that failed in flight and happened to land on this. There's the fact that it was previously part of a base. And so if you had out-of-date data, it would have shown that. And in this particular case, I'm not sure if they found debris on the ground or not. But I'm pretty sure either this or the other school that we hit had, footage that people were able to look at and see, okay, well, that's what this missile looks like.
I did see one, I think it was Trevor Ball. I hope I'm not mixing that up, but somebody at Bellingcat, I believe, did a frame by frame and said, oh, look, there's a Tomahawk coming down. Okay. Yeah. What's the window that you would give something like this? Because again, to go back, and we're kind of looking backwards now, but there's an understandable operational security aspect to this. And of course, we don't have 100% certainty on everything right out the gate. I think it's pretty safe to say we've passed that point now. Sure. But how long would you have reasonably given an investigation like this to publicly announce the results?
We're moving a little bit outside of my experience here, but it's let me say this. It's no mystery what we're firing precision munitions at, right? Is 24 hours after this happened, uh, you should have been able to answer the question, did U.S. forces fire something at this target, right? That's not a mystery, right? There's this whole targeting process, differs by the service. I'm not an expert in it, right? That led up to somebody putting in those coordinates. They reported, some sort of battle damage assessment afterward. So there's a lot of systems, on the front end and on the back end, tracking where these missiles got shot.
Where did it go? Did it detonate? Yeah.
Yeah, right. So there's no mystery there. This is not like we're in your experience lobbing unguided 155 rounds or something and trying to figure out if
Go
they
anywhere.
landed where you thought, because it was windy. And sorry if that's not totally correct, but like there's no real mystery here. It's, firing very advanced precision munitions at coordinates and finding out whether or not that happened. So that should have been answerable almost immediately. The investigation into, like, well, how did we hit this target that turned out to be a school? I can understand that taking a month or two, but again, let's look at MIDB or Mars, like these databases that contain these targets. Let's look at how this target got sent to this crew, and I'm assuming it was from a destroyer, but I don't know exactly where this tomahawk came from, and I'm not sure that's been reported. That doesn't take very long, right? It's people know the answer to that. If it was a ship, what ship it came out of, who sent them the targets. And then finding out, okay, well, we had this registered as an Iranian base, not a school, even though you can look it up on Google Maps and it says there's a school there and you can see photos of the school. And so not having an answer quickly is pretty unreasonable. Maybe you're talking a month if you want to do a really exhaustive investigation. And then there's a separate issue, is that if U.S. forces were innocent, you would have incredible incentive, from the perspective of CENTCOM and the administration, of showing that immediately as you are trying to maintain global and regional and domestic support for the war effort. So to get it through to your question, it makes no sense. It's absolutely unreasonable that in August you would not know the answer to how U.S. forces, or whether U.S. forces ended up striking the school at the beginning of the war.
But to kind of dial in on that, it sounds like the answer is known, and in kind of reading between the lines of what you're saying, it sounds like other people have come to their full assessment, including Iran and probably some of our allies and adversaries around the world. It's not that we haven't come to that conclusion; it's that we haven't announced it and taken responsibility. Is probably the gap.
Yeah, we have not publicly taken responsibility. I would assume some of the agencies and commands involved, and I think this has been reported, have done their internal processes to try and prevent this from happening again. But yeah, in terms of the administration, we're CENTCOM acknowledging responsibility. That certainly hasn't happened. I don't expect it to happen.
Why? Like at some point, you just cited all sorts of different evidence out there in the public domain. All right, this isn't rocket science anymore. People are able to piece this together. What's going on here?
Yeah, I think this war, from the lead up to it, to the first days to now, has been uh, predicated on a lot of lies, and the administration has felt pretty comfortable lying about the conduct and the progress and the causes of the conflict. Right, if this started out for an alleged surge to a nuclear weapon that wasn't happening. And we've heard, Iran was defeated every day now for 5 months. Um, we've heard a lot of conflicting information about uh, who's in control of the Strait of Hormuz. We've had the Pentagon obfuscating U.S. casualty numbers, retracting some KIAs recently. And so I think the administration has judged that they can get away with lying about a lot of this war, and about the consequences for telling some of the ugly truths are far greater than just lying them away. Whether it's responsibility for these mass civilian casualties, whether it's the state of depleted, strategic munition stockpiles, that's been in the news this week. The administration arguing over lies about that. So I think it's unfortunate, and it doesn't need to be this way. But there's not a lot of incentive for them to tell the truth.
This is one where I've struggled with it from the beginning because I think there's a willingness. I think the American people understand that our service members do not ever want to kill civilians, and we do not intentionally target civilians.
Certainly.
I think there was plenty of opportunity there to say it was a mistake, and here's what we're doing to fix this mistake. And I don't even think that would have been controversial. Like everything is partisan, and it would have been partisan, just like everything else. But it feels like we missed an opportunity. I don't know. That's if I'm being honest, like that's a little bit hard to process that we're just ignoring entirely because yeah, that's been tough.
Yeah, I mean, to take this in context, right? I mean, this administration and also the military, right? And I'm not just talking about civilian cabinet officials, but we've had this administration directing uniformed officers up and down the chain of command, in the Southcom theater to do airstrikes or drone strikes on these boats with unidentified people in them, which have killed uh, about 200 people. None of them are combatants. Some may be drug traffickers, but we don't know. Some are certainly civilians. So I think we've got to look at the standards that have already been applied to the military so far over the past year. And so it is quite shocking to me to see U.S. forces, I think certainly by accident, right? The people who pulled the trigger didn't think they were hitting a school, kill, 150 kids. But from the administration's perspective, look, you may recall a lot of things have happened since then, but last like December, there was a big controversy over the launch of these boat strikes because they were killing some people. They were all extrajudicial killings, and at least some of them were certainly against people who were innocent of any accusation. Um, and Congress got in a fuss about it for a little bit. It went away, right? The administration lied, admitted nothing, attacked their accusers, and that worked out. And so I don't think the lesson you take from that is like, okay, well, why would we admit wrongdoing here? I think what has been, more troubling and like a little shocking to me is seeing CENTCOM, right? This is again uniformed military personnel, DoD civilians, not political appointees, right? People who have been in their positions for years, who have been, for decades in the military, also like kind of obfuscating and sometimes just outright lying, including about these. I think it was not the Minab strike, but the second, it was like a school or a school gym that U.S. forces hit, which killed civilians, though a smaller number. The CENTCOM spokesman said, "Oh, that looked like it was an Iranian missile, or it was not a U.S. missile, even though there was photo evidence."
Really?
Um, yeah, I can look that up for you, but like there's been, and we've seen also CENTCOM denying that U.S. troops were harmed in Iranian attacks. Then we find out a couple of days later, yes they were wounded, if not killed. So I think there's been, this is certainly not the first administration to lie about their reasons to go into a war, to lie about how well their war is going, right? That Trump didn't invent that. There has been a kind of worrying degradation of that trickling down to commanders, right? And I look again at the behavior during this conflict as in some cases like an extension of the administration's policies in the Caribbean, which again, kill civilians, not a big deal to us. Keep doing it, for both the administration and for the career military people who are carrying it out.
It's like a punch in the gut, man. This
Yeah.
combination of I I want the public to know that the military is made up of such wonderful people, good people, genuinely good people that care about not just Americans but kids around the world. Like they
Yeah.
want to do good and they want to do right. And it makes me sick thinking that because we paint in broad strokes, right? Something
Yeah.
bad like this happens. It's the entire military that's bad, not a mistake because we didn't own up to it. And between that and I believe you. I'll look it up, but I had felt as though the folks in uniform had at least been pretty consistent on camera. But even the idea or the suggestion that the folks in uniform would be lying, I think that trust is so important with the public. I'm
Yeah.
so nervous that that's slipping.
I agree. I mean, it's been a really tough time for like civil military relations, and this administration's been very, very damaging to that. And I think, that the damage is not over, but like the there has been a lot of violation of the trust that Americans have in the military. I think that, the brunt of the responsibility is for what the administration has been using the military for and what they've been asking them to do. But the other side of it is people agreeing to carry it out. And that's a very difficult situation to be in. I don't envy those folks, right? But it probably takes hundreds of people, right, from the targeting to the trigger puller to do those boat strikes. In Iran, right? The president has threatened to do war crimes, maybe not massacres, but war crimes, right? He's repeatedly threatened to attack Iranian civilian infrastructure, not because it has any dual use military purpose, but for the purpose of compelling the Iranian government to change its policy, right? That is a war crime. Seems to be happening a lot in the region now. But U.S. forces have done that too. Like from, the less alarming example was back in April when Trump was threatening to end Iranian civilization. He bombed this under construction bridge. Bridge absolutely has in Iran. This big massive bridge that was finalizing construction in Iran. Bridge, of course, has military purposes, or it can have military purposes depending on where it is. He was quite explicit. I blew up your bridge because I'm mad at your government, not because this was a critical military asset. We saw what I believe, well, I don't think we've ever owned up to it, but it looked like U.S. forces hit a water storage facility or water processing facility in Iran, uh, on one of the islands or coastal areas in the Strait of Hormuz a month or so ago. Right, that's a pretty obvious war crime by whichever manual you want to look at, and it's terrible that the Hegseth, Trump are asking people to do that. And it's like, also, as somebody who was a commissioned officer, swore all the same oaths, was never a UCMJ or law of armed conflict or international law expert, but these are pretty obvious crimes, and there's folks who didn't necessarily sign up to do this but are carrying them out. And yeah, that worries me a lot. I mean, eroding trust is one side of it, right? And I think that it's going to take time to repair that. The side that's more worrying to me is like, I don't want to find out. Let me say this: this administration is very interested in figuring out how much they can get the military to do and what they can get them to agree to. I don't want to find out where that line is. I live in DC. A really kind of jarring experience I have is that this my neighborhood and much of the city is crawling with National Guard walking around the city. And we can kind of look at them and say like it's a sometimes it's like a dopey E4. Um, and I can kind of see that, I can see that looks like soldiers that I used to have in my platoon or my unit. But on the other hand, it's like, what were these guys sent here to do? They were sent as part of an intimidation campaign. JD Vance wanted to use the Insurrection Act to deploy the 11th Airborne to go to Minnesota in January when ICE and Border Patrol were running around shooting Americans in the street. I got talked out of it by other members of the administration, shockingly. And so there's a larger issue here that I'm always looking at and always worried about, which is the interest the Trump administration has in using the military as kind of as their personal plaything, including for domestic repression. And that is what they will be able to do if you have commanders and officers who are comfortable breaking the law. And when you have, you pointed out, it's like tons of good people in the military. Like, yeah, I know that as well as you. And I think people who serve know that better than anybody. But if we have some very public examples of, let's say, a few hundred people who are willing to commit war crimes, it does definitionally call into question everybody else's adherence to those principles. I wish that weren't happening. And on one hand, there's behind the scenes conversations that we'll never know about, right? There's different forms of internal pushback or reconsideration that the world will never see, but in some cases, like they've gotten somebody or a chain of somebody's to sign off on hitting those water facilities in Iran, hitting that bridge, hitting those boats in the Caribbean, and to bring it back to Minab, folks agreeing to go forward with unvetted, target decks that hadn't been looked at in a decade, and not knowing for sure what they were going to drop a bomb on.
Do you view your role right now as kind of speaking on behalf of the service members that cannot speak out to things like that?
A lot of responsibility for me, but it is one thing that I try to do, and I try to imagine how I would feel if I was in this position. And for your viewers who don't know, I left the military. I was an Army officer, career Army officer for 13 years, and I ended my career because I ended up being complicit in war crimes. It's kind of a less dramatic way than dropping bombs, but I was at DIA in the Middle East office, and our primary mission after October 7th was support and intel sharing with the Israeli military. And once it became clear that they were doing what at the time looked like unrestrained war crimes and collective punishment of civilians, and what we now know is genocide, I realized I had to distance myself from that. And there's all kinds of good reasons that folks have to not be able to do what I did. I certainly have plenty of colleagues who felt the same way, didn't feel empowered to, end their career over it. And so I do think there's an imperative to try and keep service members who feel like they don't have a say in these situations from being abused, essentially. And I mean, that's how I would certainly describe Iran. It's how I describe the domestic deployments. The idea of speaking out, the idea of questioning an order, the idea of refusing an order is unthinkable. It was unthinkable for me. It's unthinkable for most people who serve. I'm now like in political spaces and media spaces in DC, and I think some folks who aren't familiar with the military have this idea that, if you get an illegal order, you just refuse it because it's your responsibility and your duty to refuse an unlawful order, and so that's fine. And I always have to explain, it's like, well, first of all, you have no idea if it's an unlawful order or not. You're not a lawyer. Nobody around you is a lawyer. And if your commander is giving you the order, he or she definitely thinks it's lawful. And you are going to blow up your entire world by questioning that. And so I, now both kind of in the public facing way, also sometimes with Congress, also with some veterans organizations that do like direct outreach to people in the military, like About Face, where I'm trying to get after the problem. I was like, okay, well, what do we do with the situation where folks in the military are getting either unwise or questionable or just straight out unlawful orders, and how do you actually protect them in that situation? And it's hard, right? And there's the bottom line is there are resources and allies if you are in this situation, but it's by design. It's risky, and it's not necessarily going to be consequence free. We when the National Guard deployment started, and this was about a year ago, little more than a year ago. LA first, but the most enduring one has been DC, because we don't have statehood, and we were basically subject to the whims of the federal government. We it was like pretty clear what these were about. Again, it was complementary to surges of other federal agencies, and especially ICE, which is running around assaulting people and sometimes sending them to prison camps in Latin America. And so we looked at how, I work for an organization called Win Without War. Us, some veterans organizations, we're looking at, well, what can we offer to soldiers or troops who are put in this position, who get sent to a U.S. city and are told to pull security for ICE, or back up ICE, or otherwise be involved in what now has pretty definitively been assessed as unconstitutional activity by ICE and Border Patrol, Fourth Amendment violations, sometimes First Amendment violations, and actually, in one case, potentially a Second Amendment violation with Alex Preddy, who was armed when he was killed by federal agents. And it's like an awful place to be in. It's a place that I never expected we would have folks in. But if I can use this time now to make my pitch, it's like, check out About Face. It's in this realm, I think, the premier veterans organization that is trying to outreach and support and counseling, including legal support for active duty members of the military or mobilized guardsmen, who are unsure about the legality of their orders. When I was in the Army, when I was in DIA, and I was like pretty sure that I was being involved in a historic crime, which it turned out to be right about, like I didn't know, it's a very isolating experience. I didn't know like who to talk to about it. I think even if you're just thinking of getting out of the Army in normal ways, and you're an officer, you're afraid to tell anybody in your unit, because you've
Even
got like a
problem,
battalion
yeah.
or brigade commander who's like going to take it as a personal rejection of his entire personality, that you didn't want to stay in the Army as long as he did. And so, I had all of that anxiety, plus concerns about, different risks that come with doing this while you're working in the intel community, plus a very politicized issue, plus something that was like nobody felt comfortable talking about openly. But yeah, there are folks out there who are trying to help, and trying to change the risk calculus for service members who are trying to figure out what to do with unclear or like unlawful orders.
You hit on something I think spot on, where people don't understand. I've had that question before. What is the likelihood of an unlawful order, this, that, or the other? That is so complicated, man. Like,
Yeah.
especially as you go down the chain of command, you don't, like, the guy that pushed the button to launch that missile, come on, might not even know what the target is. Like, and it's not his job. That's not part of his
No.
responsibility. It's not in his world to know that. It's a couple levels up. So, assuming that everybody up and down has the full picture at all
Yep.
times and access to UCMJ is not realistic. So it sounds like a pretty valuable service, Harrison. To be honest, man, this is heavy stuff. I'm glad there's people like you spending the time on it, and thinking about, or at least the way I'm viewing it is you're thinking about our soldiers and our service members, and doing what you can for those guys.
Trying. We put a last year to launch it. I put a billboard outside of Fort Bragg, among some other bases, harkening back to my own time at Fort Bragg, I was like, how do we get people's attention and shake them up a little bit and let them know this is like a real issue, and try and get active duty folks thinking about this long before they actually have to act on it.
I mean, at the end of the day, if we're talking about taking responsibility for things we do, even when we make mistakes, and giving resources to the American
Yeah,
citizens that are service members, like great, that's win all around, even if it ends up being uncomfortable for some folks. So
it certainly was uncomfortable for some folks, which the we got a little shout out from the Pentagon spokeswoman and a couple of Republicans. But yeah, I mean, it's ultimately is like we want to do everything we can to protect and prepare service members to know their rights and to be prepared for these situations. Which, like as I said, whether it's domestically or the Caribbean or Iran, some troops and officers are indisputably being put in right now. It's not hypothetical, unfortunately.
it's a lot. Harrison will put some links in the description below where
Yeah.
people can follow your work and everything you're doing here. But thank you so much for taking the time, man.
Yeah. Thanks, Preston.
All right, so thank you again so much to Harrison for taking the time to walk through all of that today. Pretty dark subjects, start to finish, to say the least. Now, for anyone interested, Harrison mentioned a couple different links throughout the conversation. There, we'll have his Instagram, Twitter, and Substack all linked in the description below, as well as the About Face Veterans organization that he brought up a couple times there. So all of that down below if interested. That's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.